My world changed drastically when I was just 5. Dad had passed away from a sudden heart attack, and not long after, Mom decided to remarry. His name was George. He had a rough look and even a rougher way of talking, something that seemed to scare me right from the get-go. George brought not just his belongings into our little home, but his daughter, Liza, who was 2 years my senior and, as I'd soon find out, twice as mean. I remember the first time I met Liza. She had this smug smile plastered across her face, looking down at me as if I was some sort of bug she found amusing. "So, you're the baby of the house?" "Well, not anymore. Better get used to it," Liza sneered, her eyes scanning me like I was her new project to fix or break. Mom tried to make things sound all sugar-coated when she talked about them moving in. "Ella, honey, it's going to be wonderful to have a bigger family. Liza will be like the older sister you never had." But Liza was no sister to me. The first few days she moved in, she laid down the law, her law. My toys weren't mine anymore, they were ours, which meant they were hers whenever she wanted. And when I protested? Well, let's just say George didn't like that at all. "Ella, stop being selfish. Learn to share with your sister," he'd grumble, his voice deep and usually laced with annoyance. Mom never stood up to him. Whenever I went to her, hoping she'd take my side just this once, she'd always have the same old tired lines. "Ella, please. Just try a little harder to get along. For me, okay?" She'd plead, her eyes always looking a bit too tired, a bit too sad. Liza knew she had the upper hand, and she milked it every chance she got. If she broke something, somehow it was my fault. If she lost something, somehow I had stolen it. But one particular afternoon sticks out in my memory like a sore thumb. Liza had been particularly cruel that day, hiding my favorite doll and claiming she had no idea where it was. I found it later, tossed in the trash can outside. I remember holding the dirty, slightly torn doll as I walked into the house, tears streaming down my face. "Look what she did, Mom. Look." I cried, holding up the doll for her to see. Mom glanced at the doll, then at my tear-stained face, and for a moment, I thought she'd finally see my side. But then her eyes shifted towards the living room where George was sitting, watching TV. "Ella, maybe it was an accident. Just let it go, please," she whispered, her voice tense as she glanced nervously towards the living room. Liza just laughed from the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. "Crybaby," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for me to hear. That night, as I lay in bed clutching the now clean but still ripped doll, I realized that this was my new normal. Liza wasn't going anywhere, and neither was George. And Mom, well, she was there but not really there for me. Things took a sharper turn when Mom announced she was pregnant. I remember feeling a mix of emotions. A little brother or sister could mean someone else on my side, right? Wrong. It just meant more reasons for Mom and George to pay attention to anything but me. Tommy was born on a chilly morning in November. He was a quiet baby, hardly ever cried, but he needed constant attention, as all babies do. Mom was either feeding him, changing him, or trying to catch a few minutes of sleep. And George? Well, he was over the moon about having a son. Liza and I were pushed further to the back burner. But while I felt more isolated, Liza seemed to relish it. It was like she thrived on the chaos, knowing she could get away with anything as the focus wasn't on us anymore. One evening, I was trying to finish some homework at the kitchen table, struggling to concentrate over the sound of Tommy's fussing. Liza waltzed in, dropped her bag on the table, and scattered my papers everywhere. "Hey, I was using those," I snapped, my frustration peaking. "So? Move over, I need the table," Liza retorted, not even looking at me as she started to rummage through her bag. Before I could say anything else, George stormed into the kitchen. "What's all this noise about? Can't you see your mother's trying to get Tommy to sleep?" "Liza's trying to take over the table when I'm still using it," I said, standing my ground despite the knot in my stomach. George's face turned a shade I knew too well, and his voice was even and dangerous. "Ella, stop your complaining and go to your room. Let your sister use the table." "But Dad..." He's not your dad. Don't call him that. Liza cut in, her words sharp and biting. That stung more than I expected, and without another word, I grabbed my things and stormed off to my room, slamming the door behind me. I pressed my back against it, sliding down to the floor as I fought back tears. I felt so alone, cornered in a house that no longer felt like home. After that night, I learned to keep my head down. Liza took advantage, of course, always finding new ways to torment me when no one else was looking. George never did anything about it. If anything, he seemed to agree with whatever Liza said, which only made her bolder. Shouldn't you be nicer to me? I mean, we're practically sisters. I once tried to reason with her, hoping to break through her tough exterior. Liza laughed, cold and harsh. We're not sisters. We're not even friends. Remember that. And I did. Every single day that I lived in that house, I remembered. My room became my sanctuary, the only place I felt somewhat safe. But even there, the sounds of a happy family, a family that didn't include me, filtered through the walls, a constant reminder of where I stood. As soon as I finished high school, I knew I had to get out. Staying in that house wasn't an option anymore. It was suffocating, like trying to breathe underwater. So, I moved to the city. It was a fresh start, a chance to be who I wanted to be without anyone hovering over me, dictating what I could or couldn't do. The first few weeks were tough. I remember walking into my tiny studio apartment for the first time, feeling a mix of excitement and terror. It was all on me now. No more Liza, no more George, just Ella, trying to make it on her own. I found a job at a local cafe to pay the bills and signed up for a nail technician course. Nails were something I always loved doing, a creative outlet that let me escape the real world for a bit. The course was tougher than I expected. The instructor, Mrs. Jenkins, was a stickler for perfection. If you're going to do it right, she'd often say, peering over her glasses as she inspected our work. I pushed through, got my license, and started looking for a place to set up shop. The perfect spot turned out to be a small room on the ground floor of an old building. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The landlady, Mrs. Petrov, was a tough old bird who'd seen it all. When I went to sign the lease, she eyed me skeptically. "You sure you can handle this, girlie? It's a tough business." I met her gaze, my resolve firm. "Yes, Mrs. Petrov. I can handle it." She grunted, handing over the keys. "We'll see. Pay your rent on time and we won't have any problems." Starting my own business was brutal. Money was tight, and there were days I barely made enough to cover lunch. But slowly, word got out. My clients liked my work, and they started bringing their friends. Positive reviews trickled in, and with each one, my confidence grew. Just when I thought I had everything figured out, life decided to throw me a curveball. It was a typical busy Tuesday when my phone rang, the screen flashing Mom, which usually meant something was up. I took a deep breath before answering. "Hi, Mom. What's up?" I tried to keep my tone light, but I was already bracing for whatever was coming. "Ella, sweetheart, I hope you're sitting down. I have a favor to ask," Mom began, her voice shaky, which immediately put me on edge. "I'm at work, Mom. What's going on?" I wiped my hands on a towel, stepping into the back room of my salon. "It's about your sister, Liza. She's moving to your city and needs a place to stay, just for a little while, until she finds a job," Mom explained, her words rushing out like she wanted to get it over with as quickly as possible. I felt my stomach drop. "Liza? Mom, are you serious?" There was a heavy sigh from her end. I know it's a lot to ask, but she's trying to start over, Ella. She's changed, she really has." The idea of living with Liza again made my skin crawl, but hearing the pleading in Mom's voice, I was torn. "I don't know, Mom. Please, Ella. For me? It won't be for long, I promise." And just like that, I found myself agreeing to let Liza stay. "Fine, but just for a little while, okay?" "Thank you, darling. I'll let her know." The next day, Liza arrived at my doorstep with 2 suitcases and a smile that looked too sweet to be genuine. "Hey, Ella. Long time, no see, huh? Thanks for letting me crash here. I really appreciate it," she chirped, stepping inside before I could even respond. "Yeah, sure. Let's just make sure it's temporary, okay?" I said, eyeing her suitcases with suspicion. Liza laughed, a bit too loudly. "Of course. I'll be out of your hair before you know it." The first week wasn't as bad as I expected. Liza seemed like she was really trying to make an effort. She cleaned up after herself, made small talk, and even offered to split groceries. "So, how's the job hunt going?" I asked one evening as we shared a surprisingly pleasant dinner. Good. I've got a couple of interviews lined up next week," Liza replied, sounding optimistic. "That's great. Just remember, you can't stay here forever," I reminded her, not wanting her to get too comfortable. Liza nodded, her expression serious. "I know, Ella. And thanks again. I know I wasn't the best sister back in the day, but I'm trying to make things right." I wanted to believe her, I really did. But there was always that nagging doubt in the back of my mind, remembering all the times she had deceived me before. As days turned into weeks, I noticed a shift in Liza's behavior. She started coming home late, missing her interviews, and hanging out with a questionable crowd. The old Liza was resurfacing. "Liza, we need to talk," I finally said one night after she stumbled in past midnight. "What's up?" Liza slurred slightly, clearly having had a few drinks. "This isn't working. You said you'd look for a job, but all you're doing is partying. You need to get it together or find somewhere else to live," I said firmly, my patience wearing thin. Liza rolled her eyes, her old defiance flashing. "Chill, Ella. I'll get a job. Just relax." But I couldn't relax. Not with her in my house, disrupting the peace I had worked so hard to build. Liza's promises of job hunting had quickly dissolved into late nights and shady new friends who seemed to pop in and out of my apartment like it was a downtown bar. My patience was wearing thin, and I was close to kicking her out when I met Alex at a friend's party. Alex was different from anyone I'd ever met. He was genuine and seemed genuinely interested in what I did for a living, unlike most guys who glossed over it once they heard nail technician. "So, you really run your own business? That's pretty impressive," Alex said as we sat tucked away in a quieter corner of the noisy living room. "Yeah, it's been a wild ride, but I love it. It's mine, you know?" I replied, feeling a spark of pride flicker within. We started seeing each other, and things were going great, except for one thing, Liza. She had taken an unsettling interest in Alex. At first, it was just lingering looks, but then she started making excuses to stick around whenever he came over. It wasn't long before I caught her trying to be a little too friendly. One evening, I came home earlier than usual to find Liza draped a bit too close to Alex on the sofa, laughing at something he said. The scene made my blood boil. "Having fun?" I asked, my voice sharp as I dropped my keys on the counter a little louder than necessary. Liza jumped up, a guilty flush on her face. "Oh, hey, Ella. We were just chatting, you know, getting to know each other better." Alex looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting between Liza and me. "Yeah, just talking. Ella, can we chat for a sec?" I nodded, pulling him aside into the kitchen. Once out of earshot, I didn't waste time. "What was that all about?" Alex rubbed the back of his neck, looking genuinely confused. "I'm not sure. She's been really forward lately." I didn't want to say anything. I didn't know how to handle it without making things weird for you. Determined to put an end to it, I confronted Liza later that night. "We need to talk, now," I said, standing at the entrance of her room. She looked up, feigning innocence. "What's up?" "You know what? This thing with Alex? It ends now. He's not interested, Liza. Back off," I stated bluntly, my tone brooking no argument. Liza's face twisted into a sneer. "Oh, come on, Ella. What's the harm in a little fun? Alex doesn't seem to mind." That was the last straw. I couldn't have her in my apartment any longer. Pack your stuff. You need to leave. First thing tomorrow, I said firmly. Liza looked stunned, finally realizing I was serious. You can't kick me out. Where will I go? That's not my problem. You should have thought of that before, I replied, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. It hurt, but it was necessary. The next morning, Liza left. She was out of my life again, and this time I hoped it was for good. As she walked out the door, her parting shot was, "You'll regret this, Ella. I promise you that." As the wedding day approached, the air was thick with excitement and a bit of last-minute chaos. Alex's mom, Janet, who used a wheelchair, had become more like family to me. We'd spent countless afternoons together, chatting and planning the wedding. I always hoped Alex would find someone who cares as much as you do, Ella. You're a blessing to us, Janet would often say with a warm smile, making me feel all the more welcomed and loved in this new family. The day of the wedding rehearsal finally came, and our close friends and relatives gathered at the venue. Everyone was buzzing with happiness, everyone except for one, Liza. When she arrived, wearing a dress that was way too revealing for a family gathering, I felt my stomach churn. She sauntered around Alex, laughing too loudly at his jokes, touching his arm every chance she got. My heart pounded with annoyance, and I could feel Alex's discomfort. "I need a minute," I muttered to Alex and pulled him aside, out of earshot from the others. "I can't stand watching her hang all over you. It's disrespectful, and it's supposed to be our special day." Alex took my hands in his expression softening. "Hey, look at me. Nothing she does changes how I feel about you. Okay? She's background noise, that's all." I nodded, trying to calm down, when Liza's laughter echoed across the room, slicing through the chatter like a knife. I snapped. Striding over to where Liza was standing, I fixed her with a glare that I hoped would melt steel. "Liza, you need to leave. Now," I said, my voice louder than intended, drawing a few curious glances from the guests. Liza's eyes widened, but she didn't make a scene. Instead, she scoffed, flipped her hair over her shoulder, and walked out without another word. Relief washed over me as I watched her leave. Turning back to the gathering, I caught my mom's eye. She approached, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "What was that all about?" Mom asked, her voice low. "I don't want her here, Mom. Not today, not at the wedding. She's done enough damage," I said, my voice firm. Mom nodded, her eyes softening. "I understand, honey. And well, there's something you should know about George. He and I are divorced. He turned out to be much worse than we thought, especially after the drinking got bad. He's not just out of my life, he's out of ours completely." My mind reeled. "And Liza? She's on her own now. George had a stroke and can barely manage, she's looking after him. They're not our concern anymore, Ella," Mom added, almost as if she were convincing herself too. The drama was behind us, and all that was left was to look forward to the beginning of a new chapter with Alex, free from the shadows of the past. The first year of marriage had flown by, seemingly perfect, with me setting up a small space in our apartment to continue my nail business. It was an ideal setup. I could work while still being there for Janet, my mother-in-law, who needed daily care due to her disability. Things seemed to be going well, until I started noticing a change in Alex. He began working late more often and his business trips became more frequent. At first, I thought it was just the strain of new responsibilities at work, but then I began to feel the distance between us growing. And my worries only deepened the day I overheard Janet talking on the phone while I was setting up my tools for a client. "Yes, my dear, I'm so excited. A grandson will be such a joy," she chuckled into the receiver. I paused, my heart skipping a beat. I was definitely not pregnant. Something didn't add up. After her call, I approached her, trying to sound casual. "Janet, who's having a grandson? Did I hear you right?" She looked up, startled, then flushed a deep red. "Oh, just messing with my old friend, dear. You know, making her jealous." It sounded off. way off. My gut twisted with suspicion, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. One of my regular clients, Maria, who used to work as a PI, still had all her contacts. "Maria, I need to find out what's going on. Can you help me?" I asked during her appointment. "Of course, Ella. Give me a few days. I'll dig around and see what I can find," she assured me, her tone serious and professional. It didn't take long for Maria to get back to me with news that felt like a punch to the gut. Alex was having an affair. And not just with anyone, with Liza. She was pregnant. I felt a cold calm settle over me as I processed the betrayal. I didn't confront Alex. Instead, I waited, gathering my strength for what came next. The opportunity presented itself when Alex walked through the door with a set of divorce papers in his hand. "Ella, I'm sorry, but this just isn't working. I've met someone else," he said bluntly, his eyes not meeting mine. "Oh? And who might that be, Alex?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "It's Liza. She's expecting my child. She's exciting, Ella." You've just become too predictable, too dull," he admitted coldly. "Pack your stuff." I signed the papers then and there, handing them back to him with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Before I go, Alex, just one last thing." He looked at me, confused. "What?" "Liza will be bringing her father with her." "Did she tell you that?" "He had a stroke and can't take care of himself. And he's got debts, massive ones, from the divorce settlement with my mother." "Good luck handling that," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth but necessary. Alex's face paled. "What? No, she didn't mention any. And there's more. I've filed a lawsuit for adultery. With proof. You'll be hearing from my lawyer," I continued, cutting him off. As I walked out, the cool air hit my face, and I felt a sense of freedom. The pain of betrayal still stung, but I knew I was moving towards something better. Something that was truly meant for me. After the dust settled from the divorce, the settlement from Alex and Liza was substantial enough that I could finally open my own nail salon, a dream I had shelved in the quieter corners of my mind for too long. The grand opening of Ella's Elegance was a hit. The local newspaper even covered the event, and the community support was overwhelming. I hired a few skilled technicians, and we quickly became a favorite in town for our meticulous work and calming atmosphere. One quiet afternoon, while I was sorting through some inventory in the back, my mom called. I always looked forward to our talks. They were the little moments of peace in my often hectic days. "Hi, Mom, what's up?" I asked, smiling as I paused to sit down. "Oh, nothing much. I just heard from an old friend of mine. Liza had her baby," she said hesitantly, probably expecting me to react negatively. Instead, I found myself smiling, genuinely hoping that child brought her more joy than she had brought to others. "That's good to hear, Mom. I hope they're both healthy. Speaking of which, I've got a little surprise for Alex that I think will close this chapter of my life for good." A couple of days later, I received a call from Alex that I had been half expecting, half dreading. He sounded desperate and defeated, a far cry from the competent man who had handed me divorce papers. "Ella, I received the documents from you," he started, his voice shaky. I can't believe it. Liza's child. I'm not the father?" His voice cracked with the question. "You're not surprised? You shouldn't be. You know what kind of person she is," I replied, my words deliberate and cold. There was a heavy silence before he continued. "Ella, she's gone. I kicked her and her father out. It's been hell. Can we forget all this? Start over? I need you, Ella," he pleaded. The words might have tugged at my heartstrings once, but that time was long gone. "Alex, you don't need me. You need a caretaker and a way to pay your debts." I'm not falling for that again. Take care of yourself, I said firmly before hanging up the phone. Sitting back in my chair, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The last tie to a painful past had been cut, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe freely.
All right, everyone's presentations are done, Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my 2nd year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children. With zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job. Having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. president of the company, Mr. Mason himself had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike, what have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.